Well, hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Good News in Parks, the show created for park and recreation professionals and advocates where we connect you with news, top directors, trends, best practices, and yes, good news. I'm Anne-Marie Spencer, and together with my co-host Jody Adams, we are honored and humbled to support everyone in this amazing industry. And we could not be more excited about the topic and the guest panel for today's show. We've all shared collective excitement when the Land and Water Conservation Fund was permanently funded in August, declaring a resounding victory for public lands, conservation, and outdoor recreation in the United States. And we know you have questions. So our show topics always come from your questions, feedbacks, and surveys. And so thanks to you, this entire show and our first special edition show is dedicated to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. There's a Q&A button in the Zoom control panel, so be sure to use it during the show to ask your questions. And with that, I'm turning it over to Jody for some updates and to introduce this amazing, talented panel. Jody, let's go.
Oh, I'm as excited as you are, Anne-Marie. Oh my gosh, we have been waiting for this beautiful show today with Land and Water Conservation Fund. And what a historic time for the fund right now today. So what I'd like to mention is we have 4 experts today at the national level that know a lot more than I do and many of us on Land and Water Conservation Fund. So let's definitely get going. But first, let me mention on Friday is World Parks Day. And I just want you to know there's going to be a special session put on by the World Urban Parks Group that you can go to their website, urbanparks.com, and it will be led by Jane Miller, who is the past director of Minneapolis and also the former director of the Parks, Pittsburgh Parks Conservatory. And it is going to be filled with great news on Friday, and they're going to cover the health of our cities and the health of parks in general. So we all can learn from this. It will be from around the world. So I would definitely engage with that. That'll be at 4:30 p.m. on Eastern time. So I hope you'll chime in on that. Also, we're going to talk about NRPA conference. And Kyle, thank you for being here. And I'm going to have him say a few words right after our introductions. So let's get on with the introductions of our esteemed guests. Linda Lanterman. I can just tell you, Linda is one busy woman. She is the National Association of State Outdoor Recreation Liaison Officers. She is also, and this is the group that administers the Land and Water Conservation Funds. These are the agents that come forward in our states and work very hard year in, year out to monitor and actually put out the grants to our local communities. But also, if that's not enough, Linda, you're director of Kansas State Parks. Welcome, Linda, to the show.
Thank you, Jody. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Second, we have Eric Feldbaum. Sorry about that, Eric. Eric is the Vice President of the National Association of State Outdoor Recreation Liaison Officers. And I am so proud of you, Eric. You're in the field, directly working with parks. And he is the Community Recreation Specialist, Division of Parks and Recreation for New Hampshire, Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Welcome, Eric. Glad you're with us.
Thanks, Jody. Can't wait to talk about LWCF.
You betcha. And Joe Lynch. Joel's been with the Park Service many years, Joel. I've known you for a long time that you've been in the fold in the National Park Service. He is the Chief of State and Local Assistant Programs. And Joel, thank you for your time. We know you're extremely busy.
Thank you. Happy to be here too as well.
Kyle Simpson. Kyle, Senior Government Affairs Manager, National Recreation and Park Association. And Kyle, couldn't be a busier week for you, but you made time today. Thank you to you and Christine Stratton for making this happen. And why don't you say a couple of words about the NRPA conference this week?
Perfect. Thank you, Jody and Anne-Marie, and we're really excited to be here. Yes, so tomorrow kicks off our 2020 NRPA annual conference. This year it's a virtual experience. We wish we could be with all of you in Orlando, but due to circumstances, we have pivoted to an exciting conference coming up, like I said, starting tomorrow. We have an amazing week planned, inspiring and educational speakers, networking opportunities, amazing sponsors, such as our friends at Playcore and Anne-Marie's friends and her team there. In fact, we have a session tomorrow on the Land and Water Conservation Fund. If this show today was sort of LWCF 101, I would say tomorrow we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into the program and get into some of the nuts and bolts. So it would be LWCF 202 or 201 tomorrow. We'll be teaching and sharing. Joel and Eric join me on that session tomorrow. And we are just so excited to be joining everyone in their offices or in their bedrooms or in their home office, on the couch. No matter where you are, we're really excited. You can register for the NRPA conference up until Thursday, and that website to do that is nrpa.org/conference. And you can watch all of the sessions on demand. So I think actually this is the year for really tuning in and learning a ton, because you can go through and watch all the sessions that you couldn't make it in person to at previous year's conferences. So we're really looking forward to it.
What a great experience we're going to have this week. Really appreciate it, Kyle. And again, all the staff at NRPA and all the staff, well, a lot of citizens involved putting all this together. So again, it's a team effort, a family affair. Let's go for it this week and have a great week. Well, and also during the time of NRPA, wanted to make everybody aware. I'm current chair of the Gold Medal Awards nationally. And I just got to tell you, we got some great events on tap this week. We have the Gold Medal Awards tomorrow night. We have the Best of the Best Awards tomorrow night. But I can just tell you, if you want to tap in, it is open to the public for the Gold Medal Awards finalists and announcement. And you can actually go to live.prg.com/AAPRA. And if you want more information on that, we'll get that to you. So again, put that in the chat and I will make sure and get back with you and make sure you get registered. But a lot going on this week. Let's go ahead and let's get going on this. So here's the deal. We have been getting questions about LWCF and some of the topics we received from our surveys, again, from our past attendees, several hundred every show, have been asking about the future funding of various levels, local to all the way to the federal. Land and Water Conservation Fund. We are in a great time right now, and let's start off with this question. And Joel, we'll start off with you. What is the history of the LWCF, and describe the LWCF program in general, plus the levels of funding and how does it work? So Joel, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. And I'm happy to talk about my favorite program. So the Land and Water was enacted in 1964, and that act established both the funding mechanism and the actual program itself. And it established, so it's the Land and Water State and Local Assistance Program. And it authorized 50-50 matching grants to the states and through the states. So we've got some of our state colleagues here that will talk about that part of it. For the acquisition and development of public outdoor recreation facilities and areas. And there's also an additional grant program to support the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan that only goes to the states. And we'll get into I'll describe that a little bit later here in this. So the founding purpose of Land and Water was, and I'll kind of paraphrase from the act itself, was to assist in preserving, developing, and assuring accessibility for all quality and quantity of outdoor recreation resources needed to strengthen health and vitality. And that emphasizing and amplifying that important component that connects the parks to our health, both physical and mental well-being, which is so important in this time of this challenging time of the COVID pandemic. So as been mentioned a couple times, there's or will be mentioned too as well. So there's two noteworthy changes that have occurred in the Land and Water program the last 2 years. Last year in 2019, the John Dingell Conservation Act was signed into law. So that's the first step, and that step actually authorized permanently authorized the program, and more importantly, and a little bit more subtly, it also established percentages for the different programs funded through Land and Water. So in that case, for the state assistance program, the act calls for 40%. And then of course, we all know the Great American Outdoor Act was passed in October, and that offered the permanent full funding at the $900 million. So you can start to do the math, $900 million and 40%. And we're talking a very significant level of funding at this point. So in terms of the funding, I did want to take a step back a little bit and just talk about, I mean, it's been that momentous time here with the permanent funding, but also say that, since 1965, when the program actually started, that there's been 4.5 billion, and I emphasize that word billion, that's been invested in this program in state and local parks. And if you match that, we're talking 9 billion. So nothing, pretty insignificant, or pretty significant amount, I should say, since then, and it will certainly only grow in the coming years ahead. So, and the program itself has been sort of going through what I'll call is a revitalization or re-renaissance. The last 5 years, we've had about $750 million and whatnot. So going forward, 2000, and we don't have exact numbers at this point, but we're talking around $400 million for this fiscal year, which started in October. So that's pretty significant money, and that's for the indefinite future, each and every year. Of course, the amounts will change a little bit. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that there's two parts of this program, and I'll talk about kind of the newest part first. So the state and local assistance program actually has two grant programs. The first one, our newest one, I should say, is what we call the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. That was created in 2014 through authorization through Congress, and that funding is specifically targeted at urban areas and specifically to address needs in urban areas in terms of identifying gaps. It works very similar with this regular state assistance program that Linda and Eric will talk about. In that states will select the project, but there's a national competition. And the idea was to emphasize there are lots of places out there in our communities nationwide and urban areas in particular that have these gaps. And the idea was to bring attention to it. And then of course, the Land and Water program that most people know about that was authorized through the Act and is called just we call it a grant formula program. It was the way it works is the funding that we'll get, so however much money we get this year, it's allocated to all the states, the territories, and DC for state selected projects. So this is the responsibility of the state. And there are two kind of important components to the program at the state level I want to just emphasize, and I mentioned earlier the SCORP. So that's an important part. So that SCORP is a prerequisite for the states to participate in the program. And that whole plan is targeted at really identifying what's the sort of the status of outdoor recreation, what the needs are, and of course, setting priorities to addressing those needs. Mm-hmm. And then the second component is it sounds a little bureaucratic, but it's called the open project selection process. And this has been around for a couple decades. And it's an important piece of the program at the state level because it's kind of that bridge between the SCORP and then the program itself. And there's two pieces to that. So it kind of, each SCORP, it's usually embedded in the SCORP, but that process provides sort of the criteria for how projects are selected. And so if you've got a particular priority in the SCORP plan, what are those mechanisms that make sure that priority is funded? And then it also lays out really the how-to of the program, the timing, in which Linda and Eric will get into. So that's the sort of gist of the program itself, and we'll obviously be answering and talking about other components as we go through the rest of the program today.
Well, and Joel, just a little quick follow-up. We've already had a question. I'm going to ask you real quick.
Right.
Does the appropriations of the 900 million, does it have to go through appropriations still?
It does not. That's a very good question. So it's mandatory money now, but I will answer and respond this way. If you look closely at legislation, which of course we do here in Washington, D.C., the distribution of the funding is still subject to change. So the administration each year through the appropriations process actually gets to propose its distribution. So the program, in theory, there's 40%, in from the John Dingell Act for the program. But there's a 20% because our colleagues on the federal side of the LWCF program, which goes towards land acquisition and state parks and land management agency, or state national parks and land management agencies, get the other 40%. But there's that discretion, and that discretion may fund other programs. It may actually come to the land and water program itself. So there's that process, and then Congress gets to weigh in. So there's a little bit of push and pull each year as we go through it. But I think once we go through the process and the mandatory money, and I think we'll kind of get into a rhythm, and there'll be a certain amount that will always be there. And we're ready to fund projects at the beginning of the fiscal year.
You know, Joel, we're so lucky to have you there. You have been such a great steward of this program. I've watched your office. I've been around a long time to see this, but thank you for clearing that up, because that was an important question from our audience. So I appreciate you doing that.
Absolutely.
And again, we have the experts, everyone. Please take advantage of this. These esteemed panelists have been on the front lines of this program for decades. So please take advantage of it. Okay, question number 2.
All right.
Specifically, who can apply and where do they find the application? And who else better to ask? Linda, this is your question. You're on the front lines with all this.
Thank you, Jody, from a balmy 25 degrees in Kansas. State agencies, local city, counties, townships, and municipalities can apply. U.S. territories and federally recognized Native American tribal governments. So typically, we always get this question of, can nonprofits? We always encourage the not-for-profits to partner with their local city or county governments to apply.
Great.
So that's who can apply. Usually your city and county governments apply. And state agencies, state parks.
Linda, you must be psychic, because literally that question about nonprofits just came up on the Q&A. So
Cool.
Wow.
It's a common question.
Well, and I think too, Linda, I think to the point, I think some small communities don't realize that's why it's really, in some cases at the state level, to really get out to all size communities of cities and all size counties and everything. We want the nation to apply. This
Right.
is for all of us. And I'm really glad you went into the territories and all of that, because I just don't think people realize how global this is when it comes to the United States of getting this money out. So Linda, thank you. Great.
You
I
bet.
really appreciate it. And now we're on to our first poll question. We are rocking. Thank you all for the great information. Anne-Marie?
we absolutely are. So let's launch that first poll question. And this really has to do with your comfort for applying. So what we would like to ask our audience, how comfortable are you with applying for a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant? Comfortable, we'll be applying soon. Comfortable, but we won't be applying soon. Not comfortable, but I want to apply, or not comfortable, but won't be applying soon. So it has to do with your comfort range, yes or no, and then whether or not you'll be applying soon. So there's a combination of answers for each of those. And the voting is going like gangbusters here. So we're gonna give you all a couple of minutes here in the meantime. And while we're letting you guys vote, I'll just answer, will a transcript recording of this session be available to all attendees? Yes, there's podcasts that are available, and there's also a transcript. And as soon as we're done with this poll, I will type that in the Q&A so that you know where to find that. All right, looks like everybody has voted. So we will end the poll and let's go ahead and share that with you. And it looks like it's pretty, our biggest answer with 41% is not comfortable but want to apply of those who voted. Couple groups that are comfortable, but the ones that are not comfortable and aren't going to apply, good news, that's a very small percentage of the group. So interesting to see how that's spread out across all of those. Jody, let's go ahead and move on with our next question.
All right. Well, that's great to see that poll, because that kind of gives us an idea. Hey, this session is needed, and so is the one tomorrow. So again, please don't hesitate to write in any questions to this group. Number 3, let's get to this question then. I'm going to lean on Eric on this one. What is the required match for the statewide LWCF funding, and what is considered a match for the federal funding?
$1 billion question. So I just want to start off by saying two things. One is, we get that question a lot about nonprofits, and I think this is, we start talking about funding and match requirements. This is one of those areas where nonprofits can become involved in a project. And so there's there's a couple components. The first is, this is a 50-50 match. So at a minimum, a sponsor needs to find 50% of the total project, or at least sometimes they can overmatch a project. But at a minimum, it's a 50-50 match. The second piece to remember is it is a reimbursement grant. And so 100% of the costs incurred or must be incurred prior to reimbursement of funds. So that's a really important thing when you're trying to build a budget for your project, making sure that you have the cash or the other options on hand. So when we start talking about funding, I kind of talk to our sponsors in three groups. The first is cash, which is usually the easiest to talk about, but probably the hardest to get, especially right now during our current pandemic. We've seen a lot of communities decrease their capital dollars or lose their capital dollars, or a revolving fund or using operating funds. But the first one is just cold hard cash. The second one is donations. So donations can come from cash, whether it be from contractors, whether it be from local sponsored groups. We see a lot come from youth sports groups. We see a lot come from nonprofits. So here's another opportunity for a nonprofit to come in with cash. The other one is in-kind labor. A lot of public works will provide in-kind work, whether it be machinery or materials. Same thing at a contractor level that might have somebody connected to a community. And then the third piece to that is, again, the supplies, is donation of, whether you're building a playground or you're building a field or trails, someone developing or donating those supplies. I will say that we always like to encourage our grantees to have some element of donation as part of their budget. And this does a couple of things. This one really shows the depth of need in a local community and support by showing there's other people than just taxpayers that are interested in this project. Another thing to think about also in the donation side of things is we do require any type of in-kind labor, skilled labor. We do use federal DOT rates. So making sure that there is a standardized allowance of rates. And then the last is volunteer labor or volunteer services. So again, when we start talking volunteers, we're talking unskilled labor. We see a lot of this in community playground builds, trail work, where a volunteer will come out and provide that day of service to help move the project forward. When it comes to volunteer labor, at least here in New Hampshire, we use the independent sector, which puts out a volunteer rate for actually every state. And that's a standardized, non-skilled labor rate. You go to independentsector.org, you can put in your information to find out your state. But that's a really great resource. The other thing that I want to talk about is match, and there's two federal programs that are eligible match for the Land and Water Conservation Program. The first one is RTP, or Recreational Trails Program, which is a federal program put on by the Highway Administration. And the other one is Community Development Block Grants, or CDBG funds. Those are the two federal funds that are actually allowable as match to this program. And I'll say one last piece, and this is pre-planning costs. And this is diving really into the details of this program, but pre-planning cost of your project is also eligible for reimbursement. So if you are engineering, design, permitting, you've already spent that money can be used towards match of your total project. So lots of different options to find match, especially in these economic times that we're in.
Well, Eric, it's amazing I have been contacted by several, and I know that we have at Playcore Game Time, we have been contacted many times by foundations, because there are a lot of foundations that are interested in LWCF and really working with their communities. And actually, we have some community foundations that are registered for this session. So that's good. We're getting a diversity of people interested. And that's really going to be important for all of us at the local level, state level, all levels, especially with advocacy. One other thing, I just want to shout out to Doug Elkins, because I got to tell you, he's the executive director of the actual group that both the president and vice president that we have on the show here. He's the one that was pushing on this advocacy and show. But one thing he keeps mentioning is we got to keep developing the match. We have to keep pursuing that and bringing all of our heads together to make sure that match happens for all level size communities. So Eric, great information. Thank you so much for your in-depth knowledge on this. And we may even come back to it because it's so important. And that's always the biggest question, it seems like. Let's move on to a poll question. Anne-Marie.
Let's do it. Okay, so for our next poll question, we want to ask you about your priorities. And you can vote for more than one on this one. So what would be your first priority with Land and Water Conservation Fund funding if awarded? Land acquisition and recreation facilities development, new recreation facilities on existing land, redevelopment of older existing facilities, or specifically increasing accessibility of existing facilities. So that's one where, you know, maybe you're doing redevelopment, but you also want to do that redevelopment to increase accessibility. That would be a good case where you would vote for 2. So go ahead, and looks like we've got some pretty crazy voting going on. It's always fun, you guys, watching that ticker tape and showing how many people, and not everybody votes every time, but I would remind you that we do use this information to develop future shows. So the more of you that vote, then the more information that you give us on what's important to you and topics that we can direct future shows to. All right, we'll give you about 3, 2, 1. And this is really interesting. Redevelopment of older existing facilities and infrastructure was the first, but they were pretty well spread there. New recreation facilities, you know, accessibility, land acquisition, and recreation facilities. About the only one I would say that, you know, scored lower with 6% is just land acquisition on its own. So really interesting how that all spreads out. All right, Jody, taking it back to you.
Absolutely. I tell you, these poll questions are very important. And let me just mention right now, we're adding to our survey, to this show, some special questions for you. And it really doesn't matter if you're the professional, the citizen, a special advocate, but we are asking you, do you have a project out there that you want to see funded with LWCF funds? And basically you have a say. So your input is very important after the show. So don't think that, oh, we've got the show today, and do they really care, or asking the question of how we like to be involved? Yes, we are. We have added that special to the show. So again, please fill out your after the show survey. It's going to be very important information. And no commitment, just knowing that we do care and we want to know what's needed out there. Okay, let's go ahead and move on, and let's go to the next question. And this is going to involve 3 of you. And again, Joel, you're welcome to chime in at the end. What are some of the key examples of successful LWCF projects across our nation? Kyle, Linda, and Eric, chime in.
I can go first. Sure, perfect. I'm happy to go first. My sort of project that I always point to as a really great example comes from Denver, Colorado, and is an example of the ORLP project that Joel talked about. And that's the urban component of LWCF. And that project is the Montbell Open Space Park. We had the opportunity to bring the director of the Denver Parks and Rec, Happy Hayes, to DC to talk to Congress about this specific project. And she talked about the importance of this project. It's an incredibly diverse and multi-generational community that did not have access to open space, and also bordered right on the Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge, but didn't have access to it. And so this project really provided them a gateway into that wilderness and to that wildlife refuge, and gave them access to near to home recreation. And I think if COVID-19 has taught us anything in this line of work, it's that People are hungry for the opportunity to get to a park and to get to a park safely. And so this is one of my favorite examples to talk about. If you haven't seen Happy's testimony about this project, I would encourage you to look it up. She did a phenomenal job telling Congress how important these programs are for our communities.
Can I go
Go
next?
ahead, jump in.
Okay, so one that really comes to mind for me is the city of Wichita had a group of skateboarders that were always skating downtown Wichita on their skateboards, and it was bothering some of the business owners and the traffic, business traffic downtown. And so those skateboarders got together and they decided that they wanted to have a place that they could skate in the downtown area. And so we met with that group several times and with the city officials and the park and rec director there. And we implemented the process of putting a bowl ring under Interstate 400. And so it took a lot of approvals with Department of Transportation and the highway and allowing that area to be developed, but it turned out to be an incredible project, and it allowed those individuals that wanted to skateboard, and where else to skateboard is downtown where all the cement is, but it allowed them access to go down and skate right under the main highway going through Wichita, Kansas. And it's pretty significant. And we took that off of a skateboard that was like at Denver. And so in the Colorado area, so we were able to put a pretty neat project and brought youth together of all ages with the community, with all ages in the community to find a solution for those skateboarders. So it wasn't no longer a bad look at those skateboarders riding downtown, but they had a place to go skate. And it's accessible, and it's just a neat project. And so if you're ever going through Wichita, Kansas, and you're on Highway 400 going through, there's a skateboard, there's a big bowl underneath you being used as a skateboard area. So it's pretty cool.
Absolutely. And I tell you, Linda, it's funny you mentioned that. I've seen that project.
It's cool.
I was with Troy. Yeah, I was actually, Troy's going to be he's going to be a guest on our next show, is the director. And we were talking about gold medal because that was where the first gold medal was awarded in 1965. They were one of the first gold medals. And I saw that project. I could not believe the involvement by youth and how innovative it was. So great project to mention. Again, I hope people can visit Wichita, Kansas. It's tremendous. And look it up online with the city of Wichita.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Eric.
Yeah, so I just want to start off by saying also this is LWCF funds a lot of different projects. You know, I always like to tell people if it has anything to do with doing recreating outdoors, it's probably fundable. And so, you know, we fund anything from golf courses to pools to playgrounds to fields to trails to support facilities to, you know, large scale land acquisitions to small scale land acquisitions. So it's a really wide range of funding abilities. We've got a project right now that's actually funded here in our state, in the city of Franklin. And this talks a little bit about collaboration with nonprofits. So this might ring a bell to some. The city of Franklin is a pretty impoverished city, hit really hard, not only during the current pandemic, but previously. And so the city's trying to rebrand themselves and rebuild themselves. And the great part about Franklin is they have a beautiful river that runs right through the center of downtown. And they are funding, which will hopefully be the only and largest whitewater park in the Northeast, running directly through their city.
Wow.
And so they have a multi-phase project. We funded them so far for phase one, which was a land acquisition to build a parking lot, to build a trail system, kind of to start to put into the river. They've requested, we'll see how things go, requested for further funding to help actually develop the whitewater park within the river. And then the put out or the takeout is actually in another previously LWCF funded park. So the whole goal of this is to really drive recreation directly into downtown Franklin, provide not only a recreational resource on both ends of the park, but hope drive the economic vitality of the city by bringing people from all over the country here just to whitewater paddle. So this is a great collaborative project. The city started a nonprofit group to actually manage and fundraise for this project. And it's hopefully, fingers crossed, in a couple of years, it'll be completed.
Well, and I tell you, Eric, that is a great example. Again, diversity matching, and that is important that we keep bringing this up during the session and future sessions. And let me share you, I'm going to insert, because we're running really good on time today, locally here. When I was at Springfield Green County Park Board, and I was there over 30 years, we did, I think we're up to 8 projects. And again, when I joined the department, we were City of Springfield. When I ended my career as director, we were city county. So I've seen it at every level. What was so exciting is we have Cooper Park, and Cooper Park was started with really a small, just over 100,000. And I know I don't want to minimize that, because that's a lot of money in a lot of ways, but for the large park it has turned out to be, and for the health of our community and economic driving of our community, and serve thousands of people a week. We now have in that park, we started with 2 tennis courts. We had the matching of the actual dedicated land matching, and we had some of our volunteer and also staff and different types of matching. I got to tell you, today that park has a tennis facility, a $13 million indoor-outdoor tennis facility, a baseball complex, a soccer complex of 20 fields, and a softball complex with it all. And I just got to tell you, if we can do it, believe me, we were a small department when we started this venture. We were one of the first departments that were getting the land and water conservation in the 1970s as the program went on into the 70s. So I just cannot emphasize with you, I have been at every level, small to a large department today of over 34 million operating. I got to tell you, this is for everyone. And I encourage everyone to apply. So great examples, and just know that we're going to try to do everything we can to get as much information out about this program. Let's go ahead and at this point, let's move into another poll question, Anne-Marie.
Let's do it. We have one more poll question for our audience. We're going to go ahead and launch that now. So if you're interested in applying for a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant, what is your ideal time frame? Immediately, next 6 months, next year, next 2 years, next 5 years, or we don't plan to apply? Takes a little bit of thought on that one. I saw some people jump right in, and now there's kind of like a slower cadence to the answers, but they're still coming in. So we'll give everybody just a minute or two.
Absolutely.
And then after this, we're going to jump into some audience questions. And I can't wait to share these with you guys, because there are just some really great, quite record number, I would say, which is not an unexpected for the show. Record number. Okay, let's go ahead. This is really interesting. Share this one. We are pretty even all the way across.
Wow.
The board. Next 6 months is the most with 28%, but then it's 23% tied for next year, next 2 years, 18% for immediately, and only 10% don't plan to apply. So that's pretty interesting, seeing how that spreads out across the board. So thanks again to everyone.
Well, Anne-Marie, isn't that great to see the diversity? Yeah, of time. You and I talked about that before the show. We were going to be interested in seeing the diversity of time, and if people would be interested at all different levels of years. So anyway.
Absolutely. Let's get to some questions. Okay, so there are several of these that kind of run along the same vein. So I'm going to try to combine some of them just so that we can get to as many as possible. And we have a few questions about maintenance. So can anybody speak to, are there any Land and Water Conservation Fund maintenance grants for existing funded projects, or can they be transformed into something different than what it is now? And if not, what would you suggest on maintenance grants, or does it only support new projects and new development?
Yes, so LWCF is not eligible for maintenance directly. It is eligible for either new development or redevelopment of a site as long as that redevelopment is not due to lack of maintenance.
Okay.
But maintenance in itself is not an eligible cost.
Okay, great, thank you. We have several questions about things on the state level. So I'm going to start with the most basic. Patricia wants to know, does every state have a representative? And if so, who is in Georgia? And we've had several questions about who is the person in my state. So if I wanted to apply and find the information for my specific state, where is the best place for me to go and do that?
I'll answer that one and talk about least generally. So on the Park Services, the National Park Services LWCF website, so you can just either type into a search browser, just www, nps.or nps.gov/LWCF. It does talk about both the federal and the state program, but within that, there's a listing of all the states, not individuals per se, but the agencies that run them. Some are run out of state parks, some are run out of the DNR, some are run out of others. So it gives the listing of that. But what I usually encourage people to do, and you can even try this now if you're sitting against your computer, is I just type in land and water and the state abbreviation. And usually within 3 or 4 of the links, you'll get to the program within the state, because they're fairly prominent on each state's website. So that's probably the easiest way to find information about each individual state.
Great, great. Thanks for that. Yeah, because sometimes it just knows exactly, just takes that thing to type. I can't tell you how many times, I'm sure everybody does this. You're trying to find something, but you're just not typing the right thing in the search engine. Then all of a sudden, there it is.
True.
So, yeah. Do all grants for the Land and Water Conservation Fund in every state require a 50% match?
Yes. Yep. That's part of the legislation.
Okay.
At a
great.
minimum.
Perfect. And then what is the maximum funding to a project?
Well, that varies nationally, and Linda can talk about your max, and Eric, you might as well talk about what your max is, just so you could show that there's a wide variety in each state.
As far as Kansas is concerned, we really haven't set a match. We try to spread the money out for sure on projects, but we've not had to, because the projects that come in are either it's ranked, and so the ones that are ranked haven't hit a top to where we wouldn't fund.
Great.
In New Hampshire, we have a minimum of $25,000 and currently have a maximum of $400,000. So I will say this, that over the past couple of years, we've continued to increase that maximum as funding increases. It allows us to get more money out into our grants, but we're also seeing a lot larger projects come forward that are coming together with partners that are leveraging dollars. The day of the single playground is no longer. It's really redeveloping the resources we have in a much larger scale.
Great.
That's interesting. Eric, you say that because on the show, and actually talking with Diane Hoover at one point, she's in City of Bakersfield, they received a $3 million grant for LWCF. So again, these are real examples of different funding. And so you'll need to check with your state and find out maybe what the level of funding would be in that case. So I would you all agree with that really it's state to state?
The only one that's consistent, and Joel, you're gonna have to tell me the numbers because I can't think of it, is the ORLP program. That is a set number that's set by the National Park Service.
Yep, that's correct, Eric. It is set, and it's been based on the amount of funding. And last fiscal year, we had a $25 million program there. So we scale it depending, because it started out as a $3 million program. And so obviously we scale it depending on the amount of funding we get for that, but that's correct.
Great. Yeah. And just some viewer insight here. I don't know how many of our other viewers are from New Jersey, but Bill is from New Jersey, and he shared that their funds distribution is managed by our state Green Acres funding program, and that the funds are used to leverage critical open space acquisitions and urban park development costs. There's no direct application for funds, but our counties, municipalities, and nonprofits can apply to our state funding program and may be partially funded with matched LWCF funds. So interesting, and another kind of insight on how different states do it. Another question that we're getting from several different states has to do with bidding. So somebody said, I don't think my state requires bidding. Someone said, why do some states require 3 bids and others don't? And then another person said, is there a way to circumvent the bidding process by using one of the purchasing co-op programs? Can anybody speak to that?
So I can say a couple things of how we kind of handle here in New Hampshire. The program pretty much outlines that you've got to follow at a minimum the state guidelines for purchasing. So our state here in New Hampshire requires a minimum of 3 bids. And so if a local community does not have a bidding process, then they're required to follow the state's guidance. If a local community does have guidance, then they can follow their own. For states that don't have a bid process, they're required to follow the federal Davis-Bacon rules. So yes, at a minimum, most likely you're going to follow the 3 bid rule, which is usually what most states at a minimum have.
Okay, great. That's good to know. This is an interesting question from Matt. How does the Land and Water Conservation define urban community eligibility for the ORLPP?
I'll take that one. So it's based off of the census definition for urban areas, and that definition is not, it's place-based, but it's also density-based. So the U.S. Census publishes maps and has definitions that define those areas. So I live in the greater metropolitan area of Washington, D.C., and that urbanized area within D.C. is encompassing almost would be 3 states all total. It includes many different communities. So there's a community within the urbanized areas that has to have that 50,000 population threshold too as well.
And I would jump in there and just say, don't let that definition scare you. There are a lot of areas within that meet that definition that you may not think of as urbanized areas. So like, it's not just like Chicago, LA, New York City, Houston, like it's Dubuque, Iowa, or Jefferson City, Missouri. There are areas within that meet that definition that are maybe not areas that you would immediately think of as large urban areas.
Great, very helpful. And I've been trying to jump in on the few answers. I'm nowhere near as versed at this. I mean, a little fraction as you guys, but there are a few things that, because there's so many questions coming in, and I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm just going to ask anyway, just because I don't feel comfortable typing. Will the Land and Water Conservation award funds for concepts and design of a park only?
No, not that's a,
yeah,
right. Not
right.
Planning.
That is an eligible component of your grant.
Right.
And even eligible, there are certain pre-planning costs that are eligible for your grant. So if I'll go back to that survey that we asked, and a lot of people said in the next 2 years they might be thinking about applying. Any pre-planning, design, conceptual plans, any type of environmental permitting that you might be doing, making sure that you are keeping track of that, because if you do apply, that's a potential cost that you can incur as a reward.
Okay, fabulous. And I just want to take a quick break from firing the questions at you guys and just let you know there are lots and lots of comments in here. I'm going to read one from Lisa, but there are several like this. Amazing panelists, thank you all for sharing your passion and expertise with us today. We greatly appreciate each one of you. And I think Jody and I certainly echo that. I'm sure everybody in our audience does as well. So just want you to know there's a lot of great comments, and this is so helpful to so many people who are watching. Can anybody speak to what resources or help may be available to smaller cities, counties, to assist them with completing the grant application?
Reach out to your local LWCF director or coordinator in the agency that has it. We certainly do and provide assistance to help smaller communities, large communities. That's not uncommon.
And I would also say that we are in the process at NRPA of now that this money is secure into the future, is helping departments of all sizes apply for this money. Because if departments utilize the money, it's not all this work that we've done to get this, and that everyone has done to get this approved is for naught. So we're going to be spending the next several years helping people access the resources they need to apply.
That is fabulous, Kyle. And how would somebody find those resources? Just go to nrpa.org.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And yeah, that's the best way. Our advocacy site off of there is nrpa.org/advocacy. But it'll be I think it's a project that stems not just in our advocacy department, but in lots of different departments at NRPA. So yeah, nrpa.org is probably the best way to access it.
Great. Awesome. That's exciting news. Glad to hear that.
They could also go to stateparks.org is our association, America State Parks, and we would direct them to the agency they need to.
Great. Awesome.
Anne Marie, I've
Yeah.
got a question here.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about getting into 2021. So right before this is very timely right now. What does a grant cycle, and kind of leaning, you know, Joel, Linda, Eric, any of you could answer this, but if you're a department interested in applying for an LWC grant, what does it look like, a grant cycle? What would a department experience? Could you all expound on that a little bit?
Sure, I'll start and just kind of touch briefly at the higher level of kind of the major components of the application process. So we talked about this is a state-driven program. So that is sort of the first step of the process. So the states have their own process and timelines and all of that, and then Eric and Linda can jump in on that. But once that process is completed and say Eric in New Hampshire selected a project, then there's an application that is standard across for everybody to apply. And it's really the state program managers, LWCF program managers at the state level that really work with those local community department heads or whomever's running or administering those grants, and go through that process, because the requirements of the program at the federal level are really federal level required financial assistance components. And there's environmental, cultural, and other issues that we have to go through that are required by law. So that process is kind of a separate process and administered by the state. And then once that process is kind of we'd like to say that it goes on conjointly in terms of the beginning of the selection process and throughout the whole. Once we get that at the federal level, we're generally pretty familiar with the project. We've been working with the state on it. And then that last component is really just the more at that point of formality of approving it, obligating the funds, and then doing the grant award, and the state will do the sub-grant award to the local unit of government. And then we go off and jointly manage and administer the program through the end of the project itself. So that's the overall process.
And every state handles it very differently. And so this is where, you know, I would say, check out that National Park Service website that lists out all of the state contacts. I'll speak to New Hampshire for a second. We handle anywhere between every year to every 2-year grant cycles, depending on how many applications we have. And from start to finish, so from our intent all the way through final scoring, selection, and then final application through the feds, it's about a year to a year and a half process. So it's not a real quick thing. We set our applicants up at the beginning to be aware that it does take some time. But if we're confident saying, as long as we have scored it, we're confident in your project, we know that National Park Service will typically sign off on the approval of these projects.
Great.
I noticed Louis Ledford's on watching, and he with America State Parks, and he would be a great source also to help with anybody that would be interested in applying.
Absolutely. You know, that's one thing. Yeah, all the state park systems are literally amazing. I know you're being overwhelmed right now, but I also know you're very committed to do great things with this program. I have already seen promotion coming out through the state of Missouri on the program, besides all the other advocacy. So talk about a family together. We are really bringing forward what is so needed right now more than ever is funding. And again, this came from the audience. We wanted to address this topic in a special focus like we have today. You know, one other thing, and again, I don't know if people really realize over 42,000 projects have been funded over the years with this grant. So everyone, it's a lot of us involved. So please get involved. But one thing that I want to ask, and then Anne Marie, I'm coming back to you because we got to get to the audience.
They're all good questions. Ask away.
You know, on the matching, I thought it was very interesting. Eric, you gave a tremendous just litness of huge amount of ways to match. I don't know if people really realized how much matching is out there. I think one of them too is really on the donor side and on the volunteer side. There's just so many options there. But if anybody has any questions on this, please get this to us because we can answer this today. If you want to bring your question forward, because you know, I was contacted this week by Kiwanis, local Kiwanis that want to match one of the LWCF's grants on a playground of a brand new park. Well, that is what it's all about. So, and one other comment real quick is when you do LWCF, it somewhat protects that project and that land, because there's something, and I don't want to get in the weeds today, and you know what I'm probably going to say, panelists, conversion. There is a conversion clause that can be worked through and processed, but really, it's really great what's happening, even on the protection end, because I've been involved with that locally. So that's why I just bring up comments, but we don't need to get in the weeds. We can talk about that at the end if we have time, but Anne Marie, back to you.
Sure, a couple more just sort of specific questions. It should be easy to answer. Can this funding be used to acquire land if the purpose of the land is to develop an indoor recreation center or space? Or is there a requirement for a percentage of the recreation being outdoors?
Well, I guess I'll start off. I don't know if we have a certain percentage, but obviously this is an outdoor recreation program. So I don't know if we necessarily, I'd have to look through our requirements about it, but I don't think we have has to be a certain percent, but we would certainly address the notion that it can't, we wouldn't necessarily support acquisition if the entire park or a good chunk of the park is going to be, housing something that big, might be an ice rink or something like that. But no doubt there are indoor facilities located within LWCF protected parks as well. And certainly facilities that where investments occurred even in number of years ago or whatever, where indoor facilities or recreation type facilities, indoor type facilities were developed on after the fact. And in those cases, those are perfectly normal and perfectly fine.
Great. Thanks for the clarification. That makes sense. Is there any movement to remove or cap perpetuity statements? My city's government is concerned about the future commitments for trails along highways and through neighborhoods.
The best part about this program is that's the law. The whole premise of why this program started was to protect the outdoor resource. And so that perpetuity clause is there as part of the law. And so we make it very clear to our grantees prior to even them applying, is making sure that they really understand that they are perpetually protecting their property for outdoor recreation. So if, you got to think 50, 100 years from now is if there's any intent to change that, whether it's to build a fire department or increase the footprint of your school, that's something to really start thinking about now before you even apply. Sometimes it's really hard to think that, but you have to, otherwise, like as Jody said, you get yourself into a conversion scenario where you're finding substitute property. But I tell our grantees, once you've saved an acre, you'll always gonna have an acre.
And
Yeah, as someone who works with Congress pretty regularly, I pipe in and say that will likely never change. And I view it as an opportunity and not sort of a hindrance. Think about
That's right.
Yeah.
When we're all gone, we will have a hand in a park that will still be a park for our great grandkids and for our families for generations to come. So I know that some people view it as a bit of an obstacle, but I really view it as an opportunity to protect areas for decades.
I would suggest there's other programs for that. And so still contact LWCF or NRPA or American State Parks, and there might be some other funds for that type of project. It's still important, but not for this one.
And I just do want to make an interject to that. I know that's been a concern, and some of the stories that I hear and I've heard repeatedly, and it's usually the places that are protected under land and water that don't become subject to things in our parks that may not always be compatible, like cell towers, for example. And I've had many park directors across the country, state parks and local parks, say, if it wasn't for LWCF, our park systems would have been housing, or would have been this, would have been that. So it really does, what we don't often think about is what did the protection of that park prevent from occurring in a particular park too as well. So that's another way to think about it.
And I'd like to make a comment. I lived through that, and I don't mind telling you, I lived through it locally. And I can say it right out there that it protected one of our parks from becoming an actual extension of a mall. And this was one of the only parks in this actual district and area of our city. And it was very important to not only the neighborhoods around there, but we had thousands of people going through this park. So again, we all love commerce. We want our businesses to do well and everything, but there is importance of protection that must go on with this program. So boy, I'm glad we addressed that. Thank you, Anne Marie, for bringing that question forward, and whoever in the audience really brought that forward, because that's a great question.
It's a really good question, and it's interesting. I think Antoinette from our audience made a great statement that basically echoes what you just said, Jody, is that they use the term protection versus restriction.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Thanks, Antoinette.
Yeah. Good job, Antoinette. Absolutely. Let's talk for a minute about partnerships, because we're getting some questions, first of all, from folks who are potentially just Park and Rec supporters, but not necessarily in the industry, that want to know, what can we do as an individual to sort of help support this? Where do we go? Who should we talk to? And then really interesting example here from Patricia along the same lines that I'm going to share, who did a land and water conservation grant back in '97. And they used a group to help clear the trees for the fields to keep the costs down. But part of that removal cost was to partner with a community group that made furniture from the trees and repurpose the materials rather than waste them. So really cool use there of partnership. So what are some other ways that just citizens can get involved, and how can parks be thinking of partnerships to help?
I would say one thing that we are really stressing, and Eric and Joel and I talk about this during our session tomorrow, is really think outside the box, right? Like the money, I think we've all become a little bit used to states and localities maybe having the money to provide match for LWCF. But in the economic downturn that we're all suffering through, I think it's important to really look and think outside the box. Have discussions with partners in your community that you may not have worked with before. Go to your city council, go to your business community, ask them what ideas they might have, and really think outside the box and think creatively. I think that's a really big key going forward in the next couple of years, especially.
And I'll add to that a little bit, that I get a lot of calls from what I'll call our citizen supporters of parks. And these are the folks that live around the park. And they are just looking for information to help support their program, but it always spurs them. And I can tell you that each and every one of these conversations, it's always very interesting, because there's so much energy. These individuals come, they're reaching out, they're trying to figure it out themselves. And they're the ones that have the energy to go pursue, nonprofits or other organizations to help support the park, because they want to see something in their neighborhood for themselves, for their neighborhood, for their children or their grandchildren or whatever it might be. So it's pretty neat to see that.
Yeah, we're starting to see an increase in not so much these third-party groups coming in with funding. We talk a little bit about this at tomorrow's session at NRPA, but even project management. So, we're seeing large scale trail projects come forward with nonprofit trail groups that have the technical skills, whether it be technical writing of the grant, whether it be management of the project itself, come to these local communities and say, listen, we're willing to offer you this resource that has potential to become as match, where a community wouldn't have the ability to do not only complete a project, but manage a project, apply. So don't always think of as that nonprofit or that other group coming in with just money. There's a lot of other resources that those groups can bring.
Eric, you make a great point there. One of the foundations that is on the call today, Community Foundation, different diversity of funds, they actually told me, Brian Fogel, if you're on, thank you for this information, that they actually have wherewithal to help people make the application through money or grant writers that they have access to. So you're right, Eric, and all of you that mentioned this. So, golly, there's so many ways to do this. And sometimes we get in a paradigm, got to get out of it because we're in this together and we can help each other. It's good news.
It is good news. It is good news. Here's an interesting question. Jane wants to know, is it a good strategy to contact your congressional reps about the project you're trying to fund through LWCF?
Yes. That's a very
Good answer.
Right?
I spent 10 years working on Capitol Hill for a senator and a member of Congress before coming to NRPA, and I can say without a doubt, your member of Congress loves to hear about projects that you have going on. A lot of them voted to support this money earlier this summer. Tell them about what you have planned, invite them to the ribbon cutting, first of all, invite them to the groundbreaking, invite them to the ribbon cutting, invite them out to view parks that have been funded with LWCF money in the past. While we have this money, it's still important to share with them the good news of LWCF.
Absolutely. Love it. Can anybody give Doug and the audience some insight on how project scoring works?
Yeah, so every state, as Joel talked about it, every state has what's called an open project selection process. And it's an outline of pretty much the start to finish process at the state level. And within that guidance is also the scoring criteria. So every state could be completely different in how they rank and score things. Some states rank it based on certain percent or certain points on certain type of projects. Some states will only fund certain types of projects. I can speak here in New Hampshire, we rank it solely on community support and need. So, whether it's a basketball court or a trail project, we're not really so much scoring it on that project itself. We're really scoring on being able to link that project to a community need, a void that's been left in the community, and most importantly, how that project connects to our SCORP, that State Comprehensive Outdoor Rec Plan. So I'll leave you with one thing. If you're thinking about applying and you haven't read your state SCORP, go read your state SCORP. That is an extremely important document that kind of gives really broad, kind of a broad starting point of where your project should land. And if you can't link your project to that SCORP, no matter what the scoring criteria is, don't plan on getting funding.
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead, Linda.
That's what we do. We link it to SCORP, and we have a nonpartisan board that reviews these and scores these applications.
And do you want to describe SCORP? Can you go ahead in the letters? Go ahead and explain that. Somebody just say real quick what
State Comprehensive Outdoor Rec Plan.
That's right.
It is a 5-year planning document that every state must have for the state to be eligible to receive federal funding. And so some states, their documents are extremely large. Some are very to the point. So again, another document that's very different from state to state. But the premise of it is really to design what the need, kind of a supply and demand at every state level.
Awesome.
It's great information. It's at all levels. I really didn't understand SCORE for my first 5 years in the field. Boy, did that educate me. And that got me to even think locally bigger. It made me open my mind. So a SCORE plan is very well in your wheelhouse to make sure you look at that statewide.
Absolutely. And I'm grinning because I did some homework to kind of prep for this a little bit. And I said I was trying to answer some of the audience questions. And Jill said at one point when the first person mentioned it, is he saying SCORP? What does that mean? I was able to type that in there. There's some good news.
Way to go, Anne-Marie.
Can you guys give us some insight on how the SCORPs are developed? What level, where is that done? How is that developed? What's prioritized?
I'm just doing mine. So the state is in the process. We're just finishing ours up. Kansas State University did ours for us. We do surveys to users and all of our constituents and those that aren't a constituents we send out, and we do this year. We couldn't do in person meetings, but we did put out a lot of surveys on what the importance to people are in their communities and local administrators of cities and county governments. And that's all compiled and put together in a document. So ours should be done here soon.
Yeah, the great thing about the SCORP is it's not a document that's being written by someone in a state office.
That's right.
This is public. This is about as public as it gets, whether it be public surveys, whether it be in person. The goal of the SCORP is to find who's using it and who's not using the recreational resources. So if you haven't partaken in one before and you're looking to do so, again, reach out to your LWCF coordinator in each state. Like I said, they come around every 5 years. We'll be picking ours up here in New Hampshire in another year and a half. But it's definitely a public document.
Great, that's perfect. This is an interesting question, and you may not know the answers to this, but how are the states ramping up to handle the administration of the increased funding?
Well, I'll start with that. For everybody's benefit. So, you've got some from the Park Service, and we've got 2 states, and then we've got an organization that's involved in this presentation to you all. And we're all in this together. The Land and Water program is a partnership program. It's a 50-50 partnership program, just like the grants themselves between the federal government and the states themselves. So administration is a challenge because right now the act does not allow some of the funds to be used for the administrative side of the program at the state level. But we're looking at trying to find ways to find that authority, and will likely take involvement of Congress. And I turn to Kyle because he's a big supporter of this program, that his organization and many other organizations will be stepping in to help support that, hopefully in the years to come.
Just keep applying. States can handle it. Just keep sending in your application. That's all I can say.
All right, good.
That's great.
Kyle, you want to comment on that? Because you are carrying the water.
Yeah. We are, in their official capacity, Linda, Eric, and Joel may not be able to be advocates for the program, and that's really where NRPA is able to step in. And I work a considerable amount of my time on LWCF, and we will continue that. It's a huge priority for NRPA. I always tell people they can text the word parks to 52886, and that signs them up to be an NRPA advocate. And they occasionally will get text messages from us that say, we need your help to do this on LWCF or do this on another important park priority. So there are lots of ways to be involved, and that's an easy way to get involved in saving, or not saving, in sort of keeping the legacy of LWCF alive.
And you don't have to be a member to text you.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We have lots of, my mom's a NRPA advocate, and
way to go, Mom.
So anyone can be an advocate. Anyone who cares about parks, loves parks, can be a great advocate for the field.
That's awesome. And that's a great transition. We normally show a slide at the end here, but we're just going to talk through this. Want to remind everybody, I'm sure you have not had enough. There's more questions coming in. If you are going to NRPA virtual tomorrow between 3 and 4 p.m., be sure to attend the session on LWCF and Education Session Block 1, where Kyle will be joined by Joel and Eric and Elizabeth Fondrest and talk more about this. And, you know, he described this to me as if this is kind of 101, that's going to be 201. So you can your education on the Land and Water Conservation Fund there. And then our next show is going to be on November 12th. So a little bit of a break in between here. We're calling it Representing with Relevance, and we'll be joined by Michael Kirschman from Virginia Beach, Virginia, Cindy White with Burlington, Vermont, and also Troy Houtman with Wichita, Kansas. You can register for that. Same place as always, playcor.com/events. Look for Good News in Parks and you can sign up for that and several future episodes. And then just for those of you who are doing the CEU credit for this, be sure you'll get a survey within the next day or so. Be sure to fill out that survey. And then you'll receive your certificate of completion from docs@email.pandadoc.com. That's where those come from. So be sure to whitelist that so you get that. And Jody, I'm going to let you take it out. Any final words for us?
I can tell you, it is such good news. Champions of LWCF, thank you so much. Great job today, everyone. And Anne-Marie, on to the next show. Can't believe it.
Cheers. And thank you all
Cheers.
so much. What a great panel. We appreciate you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good one, guys.
Thank you.